Right, so Education Secretary Gillian Keegan appears to think she's found quite the gotcha against Labour questioning on crumbling schools by excitedly saying kids prefer the Portacabins. But that should be obvious when the alternative is risking being hit on the head by falling concrete in their classrooms. How bad do you think education is these days, Gillian, that you think kids aren't wise to the risks? I'm almost surprised she invested in Portacabins at all, actually. I thought she'd make do with telling kids to wear bicycle helmets to lessons or something else equally as stupid. It's also true that it isn't only schools affected by this RAAC concrete scandal, so if Portacabins are so preferable, what next then? Portacabin hospital wards? Portacabin prison cells? Portacabin housing for first-time buyers, perhaps? But if you're selling Portacabins as this great win for school kids, I have to wonder which Portacabin supplier or manufacturer has the contract for supplying them. Who's making the money out of them then, that you'd be better off using to fix the bloody schools? Well, I've spent a bit of time having a dig into it, as well as Gillian Keegan's ongoing ineptitude, to see what shakes loose, apart from falling masonry. Now, Gillian Keegan, as many of you will be aware, is unfortunately what passes for an education secretary in today's Tory government. Thinks she's doing a great effing job too, and moans that nobody ever tells her how great she is, in fact. But in her most recent farcical comment, she has proudly boasted the kids prefer Portacabins, and came in response to Labour questioning from their shadow education spokesperson, Bridget Phillipson, where Keegan answered her by saying, "In terms of the Portacabins, I've been to a number of these schools and seen children and met children in the Portacabins, and in fact, in the first school I went to, the children were all petitioning me to stay in the Portacabin because they actually preferred it to the classroom. So the Portacabins are very, very high quality. I would advise the Honourable Lady to go and see some of the high quality Portacabins that we have." Well, kids have an innate survival instinct, Gillian. It might surprise you to know they don't want to risk injury or death in order to seek an education. So many schools are in poor condition these days that you have windows nailed shut for safety. They are drafty, mouldy, poorly kept up. They were fabulous spreaders of COVID-19 as well. So many of our school buildings were built quickly, as much of our infrastructure was after the war, on the cheap, as a temporary measure to get the country up and running again, get us going again. RAAC fitted the bill at that point, but having concrete that resembles an aero bar isn't going to last. And given successive capitalist governments kept using the stuff right into the 1990s, the failure to invest properly is costing us all dearly now. So sure, the kids love the Portacabins, but they shouldn't have to be in Portacabins at all. Now, I remember when asbestos removal was a big thing in schools, and that was somewhat a more forgivable issue, I think. The dangers of that stuff when it was first used were not known, but RAAC was never meant as a long-term solution, and it has been treated as such, and that's on every government that has failed to address the issue going back decades, which has long been known about. Repeated failure to invest in the name of ideological tax cuts, for example, that only disproportionately benefit the rich are to blame in no small part. And at some point, only the rich will be left to tax in order to offset paying for public services, or we will lose them, like these schools and these buildings. This lot, the way Keegan talks, it's like Portacabins will be the new norm, as buildings crumble and disappear and the investment is never made to replace them. Or if they are, we'll lose other infrastructure rather than those with all the wealth in this sixth richest country, as we keep being told, wealth the vast majority of us see none of at all, pay their fair share finally and put this country back on its feet. Incidentally, of course, all these Portacabins have to come from somewhere and also be paid for. Are we buying them or are we renting them? And how much is that going to cost us? Who's making the money out of that? Well, I had to dig into all of this. At time of writing, there are 174 schools affected by RAAC, and apparently some 250 temporary classrooms have been ordered. And having checked out the government's contract supplier page, there's no sign of these contracts on there yet whatsoever to supply them. However, I have found one company that has spoken out in the press of being approached by the government to supply them. The imaginatively named Portacabin, spelt with a K, a company based in York. The government has said they're just one company that's been approached, but it's the only one I've found that has been linked to this school's contract. So how much do they charge then? Well, they actually build bespoke modular Portacabins, so they can be as big and as dynamic as required, in fact. However, they do also sell used ones, and for a second-hand cabin, standard 12 metre by 4 metre jobby, they sell for £22,000 each. The government wants 250 as things stand for schools, so if they all bought second-hand building site type cabins, as these are, as were supplied to my old school during the asbestos removal days. That in today's money would be £5.5 million. That's bog standard cabins second hand. But Keegan reckons they're very, very high quality, the ones that she's supplying, in which case, how much more would they cost? The repair bill for fixing the actual schools is already estimated in the region of £150 million, and you have to realise that if school maintenance costs had been kept up, we wouldn't be facing such a massive lump sum, massive bill all in one go as we are now. And how will the unavoidable costs here be offset? You know they won't be taxing the rich to do that. So how will they do it? Just let inflation rise, or are we going to lose something else, or face a tax rise ourselves? You also have to bear in mind that cost is still rising as more schools with RAAC get identified, and also the expenses schools have themselves already spent out making their schools safe and a temporary sticking plaster solution out of their own education budgets, and that will need to be replaced as well. Where are the insurance companies in all of this, you might be asking? Well, weirdly enough, funnily enough, they don't cover RAAC. And they won't pay out. It's a short and simple answer. It's inadequate building material. It should have been replaced by now. You also need to bear in mind that with school maintenance having not been kept up with properly for years, there was already a backlog to school repairs. That estimated repair bill currently sits at some £11.4 billion. So all these RAAC-induced costs are now being added to that, together with the costs for the Portacabins, whatever the actual cost of them might end up being, we still don't know yet. It'll eventually come out once contracts get published, which they inevitably have to be. And it gets even worse still, though. The costs being associated with RAAC are based on mitigating repairs for schools. In other words, just fixing the bits of a school affected by RAAC. But of course, that can range from the odd corner of a classroom to entire schools. And apparently, if just a fifth of all the schools built from RAAC entirely were demolished and completely replaced, as should have already been done, that in and of itself would cost £250 million too. This is a crisis that is spiralling out of control, and we have an education minister cheering about kids preferring Portacabins. It's an absolute madness. This country has suffered from decades of underinvestment, and that doesn't look set to change in the future, but every crumbling building, lost public asset, and failing service is a testament to the UK being repeatedly run by idiots only interested in their own ambitions and furthering the prosperity of their own political parties, and not the public and not the services we all rely on. Not even schools for kids to be taught in. What do you reckon, though? Is Keegan right to praise the Portacabins, or is she missing the point? Is your local school affected, and how badly? Is this yet another reason for a wealth tax, or are you more concerned about chasing them away if we dare ask very rich people to pay a little bit more? Would you be prepared, in which case, to pay more tax to fix this mess of repeated Tory and Labour government's own making? Let me know in the comments, have your say on this, and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily as ever. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where if Labour aren't even prepared to see our kids adequately fed whilst at school so they can achieve their full potential, what hope is there of them coming in and replacing the Tories and fixing these schools either if they win the next election? Well, I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.